Hey, what's up, family? Hope you're all having a good day. As I always say, if you're not having a good day, just know that the worst is behind you, and has been yet to be created. So, let's figure out what thoughts and what things that we want to manifest in our life, and just put that conscious, intentional energy behind it, and watch it manifest. So. Definitely, it's been a little bit, but this is just taking some time to kind of work on some things in my own personal life as well, because I'm a work in progress, just like everyone. Wake up every single day, put one foot in front of the other, regardless of what may be going on in that particular time, with the faith of knowing that the divine, spirit, angels, ancestors, those that are around us that love us, in the 3D as well as the spiritual realm, will always be there to support us. It is nice sometimes to get a hug, from those that are in their physical forms, but at least if you don't have someone in that essence, then it is nice to know that you do have those loved ones on the other side, along with spirit, the divine, and the angels that's there to support you and to help guide you. So I just recently got back from a trip myself, going back to my childhood home to visit some friends, some childhood friends there. And the initial premise of going on the trip was just basically going to a concert, going to hang out with, my old childhood friends that I had left roughly when I was in my early 20s, to move out to the area where I'm currently at now to pursue career in IT, computer engineering. So, that was the original thought of going out there. Didn't really have anything else in mind. And as I got there, I did rent a car, because I like to have my own mobility and stuff, not be dependent on anyone. So, but when I got there, I felt kind of drawn to go to certain places, and those were all places that held memories for me. So without really getting into my backstory, my childhood state that I lived in, it wasn't the state I was born in, but it was a state that we moved to roughly when I was about 12 or 13, if not younger. So it basically took me changing schools, changing my whole lifestyle as far as what I had grown up and become accustomed to up until about the age of 11 or 12. And so just the start of that journey was a bit rocky, because anybody that has changed schools and had to learn friends and make friends all over again definitely kind of understands the angst that goes into that experience, of going there, being the new kid, trying to figure out the dynamics of the new school that you're with, kind of where you fit in the grand scheme of things, the quote unquote pecking order, the popular kids, the loner kids, and insert whatever clique that was at your school there. So it came a lot with that. Just also too, we're moving from an area where it was predominantly black people, African American. I may not look like it, but I do have a little bit of melanin, in my skin and stuff, just from my mom's mixed, and my dad, is well, Indian more or less, but that's a whole different topic from that subject. So from the government standpoint, they all go by black and stuff. So, this binary system that we have. So, but like I said, it's neither here nor there. So the whole idea is basically moving to this new area that was predominantly Caucasian. And I remember when we went there, we were told, this was back in the early 90s, so we were told that basically any city that had the name of a color in it, or ended with certain variances like ville or town or burg or something. I can't remember exactly all of them, but in essence we were given like a list of cities and stuff that basically, if we're driving out by ourselves, to definitely not stop in those towns, just because of the atmosphere in that particular point in time. So just mentioning that, not because of any racial items, but just to kind of give you some context as far as what, the start of what my life was like in this particular area, in this particular state. So fast forward it, there were a lot, as you kind of grew up from your early teens to your early adulthood into the 20s, I spent it at this location. Basically, I was part of a very strict religion, so I didn't really have girlfriends. I did have a couple of individuals that I did date at a young age, even though we technically weren't supposed to. So this place, certain locations there, held a lot of heavy energy for me that I would say go back and dwell upon, and would be the driver behind my depression or my sense of low self-worth from time to time, is because despite where I'm at now currently in my life, I would think back to those situations, to those circumstances and those events that happened, and either how I allowed them to slow me down and not become the person that I really wanted to be, or I felt like I should be at this particular point. Looking at, that's where I met my first love at, and the person that basically shaped my life, or done, well, I don't want to say my life, but basically that was the individual that imprinted upon me what my definition of love was. We all look at our parents, kind of as that first iteration, but definitely our first loves, the first person we dated, they are definitely the ones that kind of leaves an imprint on us as far as that love feeling, that magical feeling that we feel when we're with someone, because it's something that typically we've never experienced before, meeting our first love, having those butterflies, the butterflies in your stomach, and really the experiences, looking forward to going and meeting with them and meeting up with them. In our experience, because of the religious background, we had to have chaperones. So there were a lot of places that I found myself going to, or just so happened to pass, that were locations where I either lived. Well, one of the locations was me and my dad never really got along too well. So when I got to be 18, my mom came to me one day and she was like, basically, you and your dad definitely can't live under the same roof. So she took the steps to take me out apartment hunting, and in the location where I lived at, basically, it's kind of a smaller town, less than like 30,000 people. So instead of getting an actual apartment, we found this older house that somebody had renovated and basically rented the upstairs. And then while I also lived there, I wound up getting engaged and actually married, not to the same person, but to someone else. And unfortunately, our marriage only lasted for like 8 months. So we wound up getting a divorce. But mentioning that because right behind that apartment that I moved into, my very first apartment, was the house that she and I had rented together. And that when we did get a divorce and we separated, I still remember to this day coming in, I left, the whole house was furnished. And when I came back, I knew that she was coming there to get some stuff for her new place, but I had no idea that the level that they would go to. And when I came back, in essence, the whole entire house was empty. So, I definitely remember, falling down to my knees in the hallway there and just crying and stuff, because I never saw myself as being somebody that would ever be divorced. If you couldn't tell, I kind of had a little bit of chip on my shoulder and stuff, just because of how I was raised, and really just thinking that, I'm not going to say I couldn't do no wrong, but that was really at a time period where I wasn't reflecting on myself and reflecting on my behaviors and who I were. We both got married young, so I was 21 when I got married, and she was 19 when we got married and stuff. So definitely we didn't have time to really live our lives, to really see if that was something that we really wanted. It was something that was pretty much kind of forced on us by the religion because of how strict they are on those that were part of the congregation and stuff. So, but kind of getting down a rabbit hole now, so that'll definitely be something we discuss, at a later date, maybe doing like a live or something when we all get together. So, but in essence, I just found myself visiting places like that. My first apartment that I got whenever I was going through so much, so many battles with my dad. Because of those battles, pretty much from the time I was 16, I was constantly getting kicked out of the house and going to live with my older brother at the time, and it just caused so many issues that, like I said, my mom at some point as soon as I turned 18, she was like, not that you have to go, but, just because of the situation between you and your dad, I think it's best for you to find a place. And it was definitely on point because I really enjoyed it. So, but I found myself going back to all of these various places. It was my first apartment. It was the first house that I had that I was renting, with, at the time was my wife. There was this park that we used to go to as, I don't want to say children, but as preteens and mid-teens and stuff, around the 14, 15, 16-year-old range, to where we would go to this park that everybody in the town would go to really hang out. And went there and just basically just going to all these different places that I had an emotional tie to. Like I said, some of them was intentional, that once I got out driving, I was like, oh, let me go check this place out. But then some of the places were unintentional, like I'm just driving and lo and behold, I just happened to find myself at these places. And so what I noticed myself doing is when I found myself at these locations, basically just kind of sitting there in silence and stillness and, basically calling my energy back from these locations, from these memories, from these instances that once held a pretty profound and a pretty prominent part of my life. And what I did is, as I was sitting there in the car, I envisioned kind of like smoke or just like energetic lines or beams or something coming out of those locations and then flowing back into me, and just reciting my little, my mantra. I reclaim my power, my energy from these instances. These memories no longer hold power over me or over my life or impact the way that I think or the way I feel about myself. So in essence, I didn't realize it at the time. I didn't realize that's what I was doing in the grand scheme of things until it was done. I knew that at some of the instances I was calling back my power, but it wasn't until I was later flying back on the plane that I realized that intentionally and unintentionally I was visiting parts of my former life that, like I said, held those depressed memories, held those memories of low self-worth, those times in my life to where I felt the worst about myself and I felt the lowest about myself. And I was in essence transmuting that energy into positive energy, because it's one thing I've been starting to learn just on my journeys is that as we go through life, when we look in the mirror, we see the representation of who we are. So like I'll use my example. So when I look in the mirror, I see Brandon. I don't see, a fragmented Brandon or a Brandon that's not whole. I see a whole Brandon because, I'm physically all here. But on an energetic level, you start to realize, or I won't say start to realize, but it was something that I heard one time from one of the many videos and things that I kind of research and listen to when it comes to shadow work and energy and how energy works and flows, is that when you have instances like that or life experiences like that, you leak your energy, and that can actually leave an imprint in that particular space. You can kind of think of it like when people, something horrific happens at a home or something like that, and then people call it like a ghost house. The reason why, in my opinion, that happens is because the people that once shared that home or lived in that home, they have left, because of that incident that happened, they've left an energetic imprint on that location that it's so strong that when others who are sensitive to those energies, they come into that space, they can feel that, they can feel what happened, or, even potentially get a glimpse into what happened because of such a strong energetic imprint. So what I realized I was doing is, in essence, I was going around this town to those various locations that held those deep, energetic imprints, and I was calling them back to myself. So that way, to those parts of me that I had leaked off and left behind so many years, was now calling them back to myself, calling them back home. So that way I could now start to harness that energy and work from a full cup, so to speak, I guess, for lack of better words, because I'm pulling that energy back. It's kind of like when you're tired or you feel drained and you want to do something. Yeah, you can do it, but it may not be with your best effort or to your best ability because you're tired. You're not full of energy. So in essence, that's the way I look at it, is that, yes, I've been successful for the years after those incidents happened, but it was in essence as if I was living my life without a full battery. And so now, what I did during that trip, and I recognize in hindsight, was in essence I was going back, calling those pieces of my fragmented energy that I left in those places during those times that those things happened into my life. I was calling them back home and filling my cup back up. And I did notice during the trip at certain instances that I felt fired up. I felt like this energy surging through my body that I never felt before. And it wasn't until later on I was doing some reflection as on the flight home and just thinking about it that, I realized what it was that I was actually doing, and really emphasize this next chapter of my life, that I've been in the void space, as I'm learning it's called, to where, if you're someone that's used to a lot of chaos in your life, but then you make the moves to remove the chaos or the chaotic people from your life, when you get into that period of peace to where nothing is going on, and you start to kind of feel a little bit bored just because you're so used to that chaos. You're so used to those energetic disruptions that you really don't know what to do with yourself, because you've never really experienced that before. And that was something that I've been going through, is as I start to put down, my emotional and energetic boundaries, starting to take care of myself financially and turning away from bad habits that had me stuck financially, to where now I'm growing and becoming abundant in those ways. I will always recite the saying, as above, so below. And to me, that means that, your above is your higher self or your internal. And as you do work on your internal self, it naturally will reflect in the environment around you, the people you come in contact with, and just the essence that you put off. And so I just saw the void state that I'm in now as a reflection of that work that I've done on myself, because my environment now is starting to shift because of the people, that I'm no longer associating with, the way that I interact with people, the things that I will and won't let them do to me, or bleed their chaotic energy into my life because of the boundaries I put up with them. Didn't really know what was kind of going on, in my spiritual journey and stuff. So, and it wasn't until this trip where there was definitely a number of, I heard a saying the other day that really resonated with me. I don't necessarily want to call them tests that the universe, the divine spirit gives us, but it's more checkpoints. So, if anybody that's a gamer, when you're playing a game and you're going through the levels, along the way you come across various checkpoints that just cements your progress as you move further in the game. And to me, that's what, tests, quote unquote tests, really represent, or as I would call them going forward, checkpoints. And there was definitely a number of checkpoints that I came across on this trip that showed me just how much I have changed and how much of my power that I truly am embodying, and how much I'm exuding, to the external world. And it really felt great, just because, anybody that's on the healing journey will tell you that, you do all this work, but sometimes you don't have tangible evidence to really show you, how much you've changed, how far you've come. I always encourage you to take a moment and pause and just look back through your life at where you started at and then where you are now, to really see for yourself how much you've changed and how far you've come. But there's also that feeling that comes around associating and being around other people that knew that older version of you, that previous version of you, to where, they say that it's hard to change around people who knew you previously, because they will always have that image of who you used to be in their mind that they hold you to. But, in some cases that is true. It will, they will do that, or they can. Some people do it, especially if they're not elevated enough. But what it will do is, through their actions, both kind and insincere, will kind of show you, basically how much work you've done to yourself and you've done on yourself, and how much is evident to other people. Because say if you go around, your friends or the people you used to associate with, and they're all friendly, they used to be all friendly and jovial, but now they make kind of like tongue-in-cheek comments, or kind of like snide comments and stuff under their breath in regards to you, to me that means that I'm triggering their demons, because I've changed and they're sensing something about me that has changed. And instead of them congratulating or asking how they can embody that same change or do similar work, they want to try and tear you down, because they see that you're working hard, they see that you're actually putting in the work, and it makes them feel some kind of way because they themselves aren't putting in the work. And they knew the old version of you, but now they see the new version of you that is radiating so much positive energy, such a powerful aura, especially if you're surrounded by your spiritual team, and it's just something about them that just irks them, because they see somebody that they may have thought at one point was below them and what they had going on, to where now they see somebody that they once thought was below them, quote unquote, being above them. Nobody's ever above or below anybody, but the ego definitely has a way of working those things in, especially if you're of a lower vibration. I mean, even myself, I'll have these egoic moments, but the thing is I'll catch myself and I'll say, well, I'll know it's because of the ego that I'm feeling this way or I'm thinking this way. So that way, at least I defined it in my mind and say, hey, ego, I know you're just trying to do this because basically to keep yourself valid, but, there's no reason to really feel this way or to harp this way anymore. We're safe, we're good, we're sovereign. So that's one of the things that I did experience on this trip, is that, individuals that definitely have always kind of been jovial to me and happy-go-lucky, I could definitely notice a definite, I keep saying definite too many times, but I noticed a perceived energy shift in said individuals that I've never really picked up on before. And so to me, that just told me that, like I said, that I had changed. They recognized it, and for whatever reason, it just rubbed them the wrong way. And so, I imbibed in that energy, and took it. It made me smile, especially when I thought about it later on. It made me feel really good, because, yes, do I wish that they would have treated me differently or not did those things? Of course, but long term, I took that as a badge of honor, because, like I said, it just showed me, reflected back to me how much I had changed to the degree that it started irritating other people and stuff. So, you know, it's one thing if you're out here being boisterous and you're doing something that is rubbing people the wrong way intentionally, but if you're not doing anything to rub people wrong intentionally and they're just acting that way just by being in your presence, then to me, that's a huge badge of honor as far as the work that you've done, the person you've become, and the person that you're in the progress of becoming. So I'll leave, don't want to make it too long, so I'll leave with this final thought. One thing that really impacted me is anybody that's been on an airplane, you know, and you take a look at the roads, especially at night, it makes it really illuminating, not to borrow a pun there, but when we're on the ground, oh, that's a deer right there. Hey, Artemis. When we're on the ground and we're looking at the world around us, things seem so big that we can only see so far in front of us because of the environment that's around us. But whenever you're in an airplane, like I said, it makes it really apparent at nighttime when you're looking down. You can see for miles, you know, you can see long distances. You get an exact lay of the land as far as how things are laid out. And it really impressed upon me during that moment that that's why I trust spirit, why I trust the divine, why I trust my higher self, because I'm here on the ground and I can only see so far. But to me, that was an analogy for the viewpoint that the divine has, spirit has, our higher selves has, our angels and our ancestors. You know, we can only see what's right here in front of us, but because they have a much higher view of things, they can see, say, what's 3 miles up the road that we can't see. And then that's why maybe they redirect us along the route, because they know that if we keep going down this certain road that we're going to get traffic delays, or there's an accident up here, you know, or there's a drunk driver coming up here and there's something that may happen. So they may redirect us to take us out of harm's way. And it really, I've always heard that, but just being in that plane, looking down at the ground at night and just looking at the images of all the lights and stuff, it really impressed upon me as far as how limited our sight is when we're on the ground. We're actually in the environment, you know, like right now I'm walking through these woods here, and if I look around, you know, all I can see are these trees right here. You know, I can't see anything, you know, beyond them because of how thick they are. But, you know, the divine angels, ancestors, our higher selves can see well beyond these trees because of their perspective. And to me, that was very humbling, to where it really impressed upon me the need to have faith in certain things. So, you know, just the faith that as long as you humble yourselves, you know, and it's not to make yourself small, but just, you know, give thanks to the divine, you know, to your angels, ancestors, and just say, hey, you know, I'm not for sure where to go, you know, guide me. You'll be surprised at how you will be guided, because we all have intuition. We're all tapped in to our spiritual family, our spiritual gifts. It's just that this world is very good about getting us to not look at them or not think of those things as gifts. And so we tend to not follow them in lieu of trying to follow what we call logic. But how much logic can we have if we have limited sight? So that, to me, like I said, really impressed upon the fact to really kind of trust the divine, you know, trust the angels, the ancestors, your guides, because they have that much higher and clearer view because of their vantage of what's going on. And so, you know, we may be faced with something that we think is our end-all, be-all dream, but when it comes down to it, you know, it winds up not working out, and we may get discouraged, or we will get discouraged in that moment. But that's where that old saying goes, you know, comes back, that I think of, is that, you know, God's rejection, or rejection is God's protection, I think it goes. So, and it's because, and that's a perfect example of, because they can see, the divine spirit, angels, ancestors, God, because they can see so far ahead of us that we can't see. To me, that was really impressive and really drove that topic home, or that talking point home, is because at that point I was able to see, man, if I was a little car driving on this highway, there's no way I could see 5 miles ahead of me. But from this vantage point, I could see 10, 20, 30 plus miles in front. And if I had a phone, I'd be calling down to little Brandon and be like, hey buddy, 5 miles up the road, there's some construction work. You might want to get off at this next exit and take the route through town to bypass it. And that's in essence exactly what, the divine spirit, angels, ancestors, they do, is they communicate with us in various ways, be it signs, be it numbers, be it our own intuition, to where we just, everybody has said it before, I got a gut feeling. That's your intuition kicking in, to where when you're faced with those instances, that's how, your higher self communicates with you, is through those gut feelings, those gut instances. So, like I said, I don't want to keep going on. I can definitely go on all day long and stuff. So, but it was really a really good trip. I enjoyed it myself. Went to a concert there, but outside of that, it was really the part about just reclaiming my energy and pulling the energy back to myself that I had leaked. So, if you haven't done that, I would definitely highly recommend it, especially if you still live in the area where you grew up in, or you're in the area where some, I don't want to say traumatic, but you have experiences in your life that tends to affect your thinking. Is just once you feel ready and you feel called to, just go back to those areas and just claim your energy back, from those moments. You don't even have to think about the moments. Just go to the place and just call your energy back from those places. Recognize that this is a pivotal moment in your life, that you in most cases did leak or bleed off some energy here, and you would like to call that energy back to yourself now at this point, because those memories no longer serve you. They're no longer who you are, and it's not something that you want to embody anymore. So if you don't get anything else from this video, I would definitely say that would be the biggest thing, at least for me, in something. So, because another thing, I'm not going to get into it, but once I did that, let's just say energetically, any blockages that those instances had within my body were definitely removed. So, I think you can kind of read between the lines. So, but, the bathroom was definitely an interesting place to be the next couple of days after that instance happened. So, and it just goes to show you that, we think that these instances that happen in our lives are just points in time, but they're really deeper and hold a deeper meaning than that, not only in our lives emotionally, but also in our bodies themselves, and how those energies, how those memories get stored, and what happens when we actually release them. So family, definitely know it's not easy, but just take it from me as someone who has gone through it. Some days are definitely better than others, but that's a natural ebb and flow we go through in this thing we call life. Just know that there's others that are part of your family, your spiritual family, this YouTube family, that are going through the same thing, so that's one of the reasons why I make these videos, is not just to get on here and quote unquote ramble, but just sharing my experiences for anybody that's kind of going through the same things, or may at some point go through these things, so that way they have something to reference, to know that there's somebody that understands them and understands their situations and their circumstances that they are going through or have gone through, and just be that friendly ear for them to listen to. So definitely, family, keep your head up, keep your chin up. Don't let anybody ever make you feel less than what you truly are, especially what you know in your heart. Because if you're here, you're listening, you're definitely a one-of-a-kind person. You're a special person. You're loved, definitely by the divine, your angels, ancestors, your spirit team. And that's one of the reasons why they're linking you up with this message, is because they see you when nobody else sees you. And they know what encouragement and what support we need, because Soul contracts are definitely real, and I'm sure a large majority of the people that are watching this, I have soul contracts with to help be their inspiration and help activate them. So, and that's something definitely I take honor and pride in, and why I never thought I'd be somebody that be getting out here making videos like this and put my face out there. But, it's something that I feel called to do. And that's one thing I have recognized, is that when the divine spirit calls, you're either going to answer or ignore it. But this is a far tougher lesson that comes with ignoring than it ever will come with listening. So just know I love you, family. You're not in this alone. You definitely have somebody there that's by your side. And there's a song that I listened to this weekend that was definitely great. It's called, it's by the artist Common, called "The Light." Common, "The Light." So I would definitely recommend anybody who's feeling in a down state, just listen to that and just know that that's the song from your spirit team, from the divine, from your angels that are there watching you and protecting over you and stuff. And just like I said, just know you're loved. So if nobody else tells you, just know that I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you so much. And you're an amazing person. Even if you can't see it right now, just know that you're an amazing person. And there are people in your life that know how amazing you are, and it's just waiting for you to see how amazing you are. So, but definitely love you, family. Hope you have a good day. And like I said, I love you. Tomorrow's going to be a great day. We're manifesting that, and we're going to manifest that together. So have a good day, family. I love you. I love you. I'm going to go over here and chill by this waterfall a little bit and just relax and kind of, journal a little bit. So, but have a good day, family. Love you guys. Bye-bye.